What happens when a member of Congress asks a defense secretary if he'd shoot American protesters on the president's orders? Jill Tokuda's question wasn't just tough, it cut to the very heart of democracy itself.
Here now recognizes the gentlelady from Hawaii, Ms. Tokuda.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I agree we've had many performances today, but what we'd like is some answers. Mr. Secretary, did you invite Elon Musk for a briefing on war plans with China to the Pentagon? Yes or no is simple.
There's been a lot of hyperbole and incorrect reporting around that situation, but we did invite Elon over to come talk to us generally, but there was no war plans being discussed.
Okay, so whose idea was it to invite him to the Pentagon for a briefing? You mentioned you served at the pleasure of the president. Was it the president's will to have him come and be briefed?
Well, as you know, at that time, Elon Musk was leading up Doge efforts, and we've taken a great investment in Doge at DOD, and so getting his input on how we make DOD more efficient makes a great deal of sense.
Okay, but don't you think it's a conflict of interest for the world's richest man? Many of the contracts that the DOD is engaged in, billions of dollars of contracts going to his company, and he is, as to your point, was leading Doge, which was involved in cutting hundreds of contracts, but also becoming intimately aware of the platforms and the requirements that would be given out for new contracts. Did you not think it was a conflict of interest to invite someone with financial interests into the Pentagon to have firsthand knowledge of what they could then bid on for their own, enrichment?
Ma'am, it was just an informal discussion, but I'll tell you, anyone that knows our Defense Department knows we show no preference to any company other than what your capabilities are, and we're grateful for the places where his companies benefit our national defense.
So for a $280 million donation, the world's richest man with companies intimately linked and involved in billion-dollar contracts with the Department of Defense gain access into the Pentagon. So would you say that any company right now that has multi-billion-dollar contracts with the Department of Defense has access to the Pentagon right now? 1-hour briefings with you, personally.
On the regular basis,
the answer
I meet with many people and many different companies and many different aspects of our defense industrial base to ensure we have the best possible capabilities. It would be imprudent to do
Well, I'm
otherwise.
sure for an investment of $280 million, Elon's investors are quite happy that it's come out into the billions. I want to jump questions right now. Mr. Secretary, on January 6, 2021, rioters and looters attacked federal law enforcement officials, vandalized and destroyed federal government property, and caused an estimated $2.7 billion in damages right here at the Capitol. Would you have sent the National Guard and the Marines in on that day?
Well, unfortunately, President Trump requested the National Guard in advance, and that was...
It took him quite a long time. I'm asking you, as Secretary of Defense, would you have sent in the National Guard and the Marines on that day? We had 140 Capitol Police officers injured. One died the next day. Would you have sent in the National Guard and the Marines?
As I said, President Trump directed National Guard to be there in advance.
And I think you can look at the record of how long it actually took for him to actually send them in. But it's good to hear that it sounds like you would have sent in the National Guard and the Marines on that day in which the insurrection was taking place right here at the Capitol. Mr. Secretary, during your confirmation hearing, you failed to deny the conclusion that you would carry out an order to shoot protesters in the legs. So let me be direct. Given what we are seeing across the country right now, would you carry out or issue an order by the president for our military to fire upon protesters actively engaging in their civil right to exercise free speech, their First Amendment rights? Would you give that order from the president?
I assume you're insinuating what's going on in Los Angeles, and I wouldn't call
Not just
that a
Los
peaceful
Angeles.
protest.
If we take a look at protests throughout the country, it's a simple question. If directed by the president, would you order our military to fire upon protesters? Simple yes or no.
Ma'am, we have, as you know, and as this committee knows, we have standard rules of engagement that are in place that give guidance to our troops, and they abide by them.
I'm asking what you would do. Again, you said you serve at the pleasure of the president. Is that not true?
I do serve at the
So
pleasure.
if the president told you to shoot people in the legs, would you do so? Now, you failed to answer this question as well in your confirmation hearing when asked by members of the Senate.
Because I refuse to accept a false hypothetical that's attempting to put me in a corner and make it look like a
At
representation.
a time when we have more Marines and National Guard in Los Angeles than
we
we do in Syria and Iran alone, I don't think this is a hypothetical. This is an actual situation that we are dealing with right now. So again, I will ask the question, the last 14 seconds I have, would you order our military to shoot at their fellow countrymen if ordered by the president?
I think it's interesting that for 4 years, insurrection was the left's favorite
I think we know your
word,
answer. Thank you, Mr.
and
Chair.
that
I
when
yield
it's
back.
invoked in L.A., they were
Gentlelady yields back. Gentlelady's time's expired.
When Jill Tokuda pressed Pete Hegseth with the blunt question, if the president told you to shoot people in the legs, would you? She cut straight through political theater into the heart of American democracy. It wasn't just a hypothetical. It was about whether the most powerful military in the world could ever be turned against the very citizens it swore to protect. And that's why this exchange matters more than it might seem at first glance. To really understand this, you need to step back and look at what's at stake. In America, we have a foundational principle. The military does not police the public. That's why laws like the Posse Comitatus Act of 1878 exist. It was designed to prevent presidents from using troops to enforce domestic laws or control civilian protests. That separation is one of the guardrails protecting us from sliding into authoritarianism. When you see armed soldiers on city streets being ordered to deal with political dissent, you're no longer living in a free democracy. You're living in something closer to a military state. Tokuda's question forces us to confront that danger head-on. Because if the answer to her question is anything other than, no, that would be unlawful, it cracks open the door to abuse. Imagine what that precedent would mean. If one president could order it, another could too. Political protests, civil rights demonstrations, union strikes, all could be met not with debate, but with bullets. That's not just about law, it's about the very character of our society. And here's where history becomes important. We've seen moments where the military was used in ways that rattled the country. Think about the Kent State shootings in 1970, when the National Guard opened fire on student protesters, killing 4 and wounding 9. That was over 50 years ago, but the images of young Americans lying dead on their own campus remain a warning of how quickly things can spiral when troops are brought into civilian protest spaces. Tokuda's question echoes that history, and it asks us to remember, do we want to repeat it? There's also the political cost. When leaders blur the line between protest and insurrection, between dissent and threat, it becomes easier to justify excessive force. But in a democracy, protest is not a threat to the system, it's part of the system. Free assembly and free speech are not privileges the government can take away, they are rights guaranteed by the Constitution. When politicians talk casually about military crackdowns, or when military officials refuse to say outright that they would never obey an unlawful order to fire on civilians, it signals a dangerous erosion of that principle. And let's not forget the human dimension. Behind every protest are people, mothers, fathers, workers, students, expressing grievances, demanding change, exercising the rights that define citizenship. To treat them as enemy combatants is to forget that they are the very public the government is meant to serve. Even a non-lethal shot to the leg can be fatal or permanently life-altering. Once the government gives itself permission to cross that line, the social contract between the people and their leaders begins to collapse. So Jill Tokuda's question isn't just about Pete Hegseth. It's about testing whether our institutions can still draw a bright red line around the most basic freedoms. It's about whether we, as a nation, still insist that disagreements are resolved at the ballot box, in the courts, or through protest, not through military force. That's why her refusal to accept vague answers matters, because vague answers erode accountability. Clear no's reinforce boundaries, and boundaries are what keep a democracy intact when pressure builds. So what should you take away from this? The fact that this question even needed to be asked should concern all of us. It shows how fragile these guardrails can be when rhetoric gets normalized and laws get blurred. If we care about keeping this democracy alive, we need to stay vigilant, demand accountability, and push back whenever leaders try to turn the tools of national defense inward against their own citizens. Tell us in the comments, do you think the military should ever be used against American protesters? Or is that a red line that should never be crossed? And if you want more breakdowns that cut past the political spin and expose the deeper stakes, subscribe to Left Lens. Because moments like this aren't just about one exchange in Congress, they're about whether freedom and democracy still mean what they're supposed to.